In this video, I'll be explaining lesson number 2, classification of businesses. So as you all know, not all businesses, they work in the same stage or in the same, let's say, sector. So let's see what are the 3 stages of economic activity, what are the 3 sectors that all businesses work in. So stages of economic activity. So here we have the stages in the production and sale. Over here we have the stages, and in other words we have the sectors. We can call them stages, we can call them sectors as well. So the first stage is the primary, the second one is the secondary, and the third stage or the third sector that businesses work in is the tertiary. So let's see what is a primary sector. What is the primary stage? The primary sector of an industry extracts and uses the natural resources of Earth to produce raw materials used by other businesses. So in this sector, they work with the raw material and they extract it in order to give it out to the secondary and the tertiary sector to work in their industry. So stage number 1, it is called the primary stage of production. So this stage involves the Earth's natural resources. Activities in the primary sector of industry include farming. So these are examples of activities that are done in the primary sector: farming, fishing, forestry, and the extraction of raw materials such as oil and copper ore. Now, miss, let's talk about the secondary sector, okay, or the secondary stage. The secondary sector of industry manufactures goods using the raw materials provided by the primary sector. So after the primary sectors, let's say, extract all the raw materials, it hands it out to the secondary sector, or businesses working in the secondary sector, so they can proceed with their production and in their manufacturing process. So stage number 2, it's called the secondary stage of production. This stage involves taking the materials and resources provided by the primary sector and converting them into manufactured or processed goods. Activities in the secondary sector of the industry includes, these are the examples of activities that happens in the secondary stage or in the secondary sector: building, construction, aircraft and car manufacturing, computer assembly, and bread baking. So these are examples of the activities. And the third and the final sector, or the final stage, it's the tertiary sector. The tertiary sector industry provides services. So we have to focus on the word services, because we have to link the word tertiary to the services. So it provides services to consumers and the other sectors of the industry. So the tertiary sector, they have a direct contact with the customer. They provide services for the customer as well. So stage 3, it's called the tertiary sector of the production. This stage involves providing services to both consumers and other businesses. So in the stage number 3, the businesses working in the tertiary sector, they have a direct contact with customers and they also provide services for businesses as well. So let's see what are the activities in the tertiary sector. It's transport, banking, retail, insurance, and hotels and hairdressing. So all of these activities in the tertiary sector, they're providing services for consumers and businesses, and they have direct contact with the consumers. Relative importance of economic sector. So how can I know which sector of industry is the most important in any country? How can I know if the primary sector is the most important, or the secondary sector is the more important, or the tertiary? So it depends on two main ways I can compare these sectors upon. The first thing is the percentage of the country's total number of workers employed in each sector. So we have the primary, I have the secondary, and I have the tertiary. So the first thing I must do is to compare the total number of workers working in the primary, secondary, and tertiary, and the sector that has the highest number of employees or workers is the most important sector in that country. And I have another thing I can compare upon is the value of output of goods and services and the proportion. This is the total national output. So I will calculate the output of goods and services, then I have to know the value of this output of goods and services. So which sector is providing me with the higher number or the most value or the highest value of outputs of goods and services. So changes in sectors importance. So like sometimes there are countries that the most important sector is the primary, then it shifts into the secondary, or it's in the secondary that shifts into the tertiary. So let's see, like one of the most important terms that we must understand in changing in the sector's importance is the deindustrialization. So deindustrialization occurs when there is a decline in the importance of the secondary manufacturing sector of industry in the country. So if the secondary sector was the most important and this importance is declining for a specific reason, then this is called the industrialization. It's the decline in the importance of the secondary sector that includes manufacturing, the raw materials taken from the primary sector. All right. So it's also here the decline in the manufacturing or secondary sector of industry. It's called deindustrialization. So also here there are several reasons for changes in the relative importance of the three sectors over time. So while like over time there might be some changes in the importance of the sectors, and we have three main reasons why. So if you were asked what are the reasons behind the changes in the importance of any sector, or shifting from, let's say, primary to secondary or secondary to tertiary, have three main reasons. The first reason is sources of some primary products such as timber, oil, and gas become depleted. Okay, this has been true for Somalia with the cutting down of most of its forests. So the raw materials, the things that this primary sector was depending on, it's become depleted. Okay, so it's going to change the importance of the primary sector. The second one, most developed economies are losing competitiveness in manufacturing to newly industrialized countries such as Brazil, India, and China. So some countries were focusing on the secondary sector, but also they are facing competition from other countries who are also focusing on the secondary sector, such as India and China. So because the secondary sector it's evolving in India and China, so it's becoming a competition for other countries who are also depending on the secondary sector in their economy. And number three, as countries' total wealth increases and living standards rise, consumers tend to spend higher proportion of their incomes on services such as travel and restaurants than on manufacturing products produced from primary products. So because the people living in this specific country, their income has increased, so they are focusing more on getting the services ready. They are no longer interested on, let's say, extracting raw materials and focusing on the primary sector. So because of this new interest and the new rise in the income of their population, they are shifting their focus from primary sector or secondary sector into tertiary, and they're focusing more on providing services for this population, because it's now their, let's say, new trend. And because the people, because of their high income, their living standards is rising. Therefore this country must focus on the tertiary sector in order to provide these people with high income with services more than the primary or secondary activities. So here, miss, we have the term mixed economy. nearly every country in the world has a mixed economy with private sector and the public sector. First, let's understand what's a mixed economy. Mixed economy has both a private sector and a public sector. So most countries all around the world, they have both. They have the private sector and they have the public sector. So we call it mixed because they have both. They don't have only private sector, or they don't have only public sector. Now let's understand what's a private sector. So we have one private sector and we have a public sector. When country has both private and public sector, we called it a mixed economy country. So private sector, businesses not owned by the government. That's why we call it private. So when the country has a lot of businesses that the government has no control over, or it's not owned by the government, we call it a private company. These businesses have a lot of, let's say, features. The first one is they make their own decisions about number one, what to produce, number two, how it should be produced, and number three, what price should be charged for. So because it's a private business, because it's included in the private sector, the government will not be, let's say, interfering in three main decisions, which is what to produce. It's the private business has the total freedom to choose what to produce or how it should be produced. And number three, the prices that they are charging the customers for. Most businesses in the private sector will aim to make profit. This is the main aim for the private sector, is just to make profit out of the products they are, let's say, offering for the customers. Okay, but even so, there are likely to be some government controls over these decisions, and these are explained later. So also, just because you're a private sector, that doesn't mean there are few things that the government is going to have control over, but we're gonna explain later what kind of control the government might have on these private sectors. Now, let's see the second sector, which is the public sector. Whenever I see the word public, I link it to the government. It's government-owned and controlled businesses and organizations. So the businesses in the public sector, it's controlled and owned by the government. All right, so the government or other public sector authority makes decisions about what to produce, how much to charge consumers. So in this case, in the public sector, the government has, let's say, total control on a lot of decisions of what to produce and how much to charge consumers. Here in the private sector, the private businesses have let's say, the freedom to do these decisions, and here in the public sector, the government is doing these decisions. Here in the public sector, some goods and services are provided free of charge to the consumer, such as state health and education services. So, in the public sector, let's say the aim for the businesses in the public sector is not to actually gain profit, more like to provide services for the customers. So in some cases, these services or these goods are free of charge to the customer. The money for these comes not from the user but from the taxpayer. They are getting their money to, let's say, make this business go on and on from the taxes they're getting. Okay, now miss, let's see which business activities are usually in the public sector. So there's a lot of businesses that are controlled and owned by the government, and they are in the public sector, and some of them, they are health, education, defense, public transport, water supply, and electricity supply. Health, it's like the public hospitals. Education, it's like the public schools. In the mixed economies, there has been some changes. In recent years, many governments have changed the balance between the private sector and the public sector in their economies. They have done this by selling some public sector businesses owned and controlled by the government to private sector businesses. It's called privatization, and this is the definition of privatization. It's the ownership and the control is shifted from it's shifted from the public sector, owned and controlled by the government, and they are giving out these businesses, or these, let's say, uh, these businesses that are owned and controlled by the government are handed over to the private sector businesses. It's called privatization, which means I'm changing it from public to private. This process, it's called privatization. Let's say in many European and Asian countries, the water supply, electricity supply, and public transport systems has been privatized, which are like some of the activities we just explained over here, changing it from a public sector into a private sector. So, you might ask yourself why the government might do this privatization, why it's changing its control and ownership from the government into a private business, to a private owner. So it's often claimed that the private sector are more efficient than the public sector businesses. This is the first one because private sector businesses are more efficient than public sector businesses. And this might be because their main objective is profit and therefore cost must be controlled. Also, number two, or the second reason why is private sector owners might have invest more capital in the business than the government can afford. And let's see what capital means. Capital is the money invested into a business by the owner. So one of the reasons why government is handing out some of their businesses that were public before and now it's private, because owners in the private sector are willing to invest more money in these businesses and to make it more efficient. Competition between private sector businesses can help to improve product quality, and also this is a third reason why some government they hand out some of their businesses to the private sector. One of the let's say drawbacks or the disadvantages of changing businesses from a public sector to a private sector is some private businesses might make more workers unemployed, and in order to cut costs. And private sector businesses also less likely to focus on social objectives such as the public sector. The public sector where like the businesses in the public sector were focusing on giving out the customer service more than just the aim of gaining profit from this customer. So when I hand out this business to a private sector, it's gonna let's say focus more on gaining profit and focus less on the social objectives, which is serving the community and serving the customer. Changes in the balance between the private sector and the public sector are likely to continue in many mixed economies.